Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for that very generous introduction, Deb. It really is an honor to be with all of you. And I want to especially thank both Russ and Deb for this invitation and for setting up everything for us tonight. Are you able to see the slides that I'm sharing? And are you able to hear me okay? Great. So I'm starting with this slide that has an image from the March for Life. The March for Life is planned for later this week in Washington, D.C., and leaders of the Catholic Church in the United States, especially leaders in ordained ministries, have spent a considerable amount of money and time in promoting their vision of what it means to respect life. I have been concerned for some time that their action plans overlook the full spectrum of reproductive injustices women face in the US and around the world, and that even in some cases, their approach advances an approach to moral, political, and policy questions that values unborn lives, even sometimes at the expense of women's lives. While the focus of tonight's presentation is broader than the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, we are living in distressing times. Leaders of the USCCB seem to want to double down on an approach to civic life that focuses on the culture wars instead of implementing the call to live out a synodal church. I have some ideas about how we can move past this very painful situation towards an ecclesial context that is more inclusive and more just. So this presentation tonight is going to highlight some of the obstacles to full participation of women in the church, and then suggest possible action steps that flow from the very basic claim that women have inherent human dignity, deserving of equal consideration in all areas of church and society. One of my frustrations as I continue to write for the Academy and the church is that I feel like I'm constantly saying, wake up, people. Rosemary Radford Ruther said this 40 years ago. Or I think to myself, do I really need to repeat what Lisa Soul Cahill published 30 years ago? It saddens me that many ordained ministers are unfamiliar with the significant contributions of scholars and activists, such as Elizabeth Johnson, Ann Nasimiyu-Wasike, Sean Copeland, Susan Ross, Margaret Farley, Teresa Kane, Christine Schenck, Maria Pilar Aquino, Simone Campbell, Jamie Phelps, Shawnee Daniel Sykes, Thea Bowman, Florence Gilman, Ivone Gabara, Agnes Brazal, Sandra Schneiders. I could go on and on. So many more. So first, I want to acknowledge the many scholars and activists whose work inspires me to keep going in this challenging attempt to continue to advance justice for and with women in the Catholic Church. So the bulk of tonight's presentation will present obstacles to the full participation of women in the church. I'm going to start with canon law. Phyllis Saginaw has reminded us recently that one of the legacies of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, may he rest in peace, is that when he led the CDF 40 years ago, he persuaded the committee revising the Code of Canon Law to keep governance and ministry within the clerical caste. When women ask what prevents them from full participation in the life of the church, one of the obvious answers is canon law. Canon law gives significant power and authority to the local ordinary, as well as to curial offices. Canon law keeps in place the stained glass ceilings that prevent women from having a seat at every table in which ecclesial decisions are made. And this is the case even though Lumen Gentium says that there should be no inequality on the basis of race or sex, that all share a true equality. The church is overdue for significant reforms in canon law. The reforms of 1983 focused on implementing the Second Vatican Council. It is true that Pope Francis and his predecessors made modest revisions already via the process of issuing apostolic constitutions and apostolic letters that order changes in particular canons. But I am suggesting something bigger, an overhaul by the Pontifical Council for Legislative Texts, under a process through which women with expertise are included in every step of that overhaul. Undertaking internal reforms of church teachings and practices would, of course, be a monumental task, but it can begin brick by brick, incrementally. Sex inequality is written into canon law, written into our diocesan policies, curial practices, and our theology of ministry. Some reforms could be easier to make, forbidding child marriage, for example, while others will certainly be difficult. Reforms of canons related to the oversight of women's religious organizations, expansion of lay preaching, a renewed conversation about the appropriate oversight by bishops of Catholic healthcare systems, and criminal punishment for the failure to report to civilian authorities in cases of sexually abusive priests, which, by the way, has wide support among survivors of clerical sexual violence. So, canon law is a first obstacle. The second is erasure. One of the things that one will notice when reading magisterial documents is that they usually just cite other magisterial documents. The erasure of women's voices is significant. Even though women have been contributing to the Theological Academy, not only in the area of feminist theology, but also in the areas of biblical hermeneutics, historical theology, hagiography, sacred music, liturgy, homiletics, ethics, every subdiscipline of theology, those women's voices are not cited in the authoritative teachings of the church. The reluctance to cite theologians has a significant impact on those who read magisterial teachings, because what it communicates is that women's voices don't matter in shaping authoritative teachings. Now, I don't mean to suggest that all women agree on everything, or that women's voices, were they to be cited, would be univocal. However, in the absence of those voices, we clearly already send a message that women's voices don't matter in the construction of church teachings. One of the clear messages that we should be forwarding as feminist scholars in the church is the very basic message: we are here, we are here, we are here, we are here. A third obstacle is the program of priestly formation. The program of priestly formation, published on the USCC website, is now in its 6th edition, and it diminishes the influence of Catholic feminist theologians and restricts the opportunities for seminarians to learn about the exciting breadth and depth of Catholic scholarship today. The reality of ecclesial patriarchy creates a credibility gap described by moral philosophers as epistemic injustice, leading to women experiencing an unjust deficit of credibility. This is explained by Miranda Fricker, if you're not familiar with her work. Natalia Imperatori Lee explains that in the Roman Catholic Church, quote, women have not been considered reliable witnesses to their own lives or faith, or the faith of the church that they love, end quote. According to the program of priestly formation, catechesis has a prominent place in the seminary curriculum, and moral theology focuses on magisterial teachings, including absolute moral norms. Seminary faculty should ensure that particular attention is paid to the synthesis of the Christian moral life in the writings of the 13th century Saint Thomas Aquinas. The assumption of the document are that seminarians are being trained to inform parishioners about God's will for their lives. Priests in training are not trained to listen to how the Holy Spirit is already moving within the lives of lay people in the parish. For example, and this is a quote from the document, priests are called upon to assist the faithful in the formation of a sound moral conscience in accord with sacred scripture, tradition, and magisterial teaching, end quote. The document explains that the pastoral goal is gently but consistently fostering the love of God and neighbor. This is especially important in the areas of sexuality and family life. Everything is evaluated in light of the magisterium of the church. The authoritarian mindset present here and elsewhere within the program of priestly formation has negative consequences for the treatment of women in ordinary parish settings. It sets us up to be preached at instead of listened to, prayed over instead of prayed with, shamed instead of accompanied. Let me give some examples from my current research on reproductive injustice. Half of pregnancies today are pregnancies that women and girls do not deliberately choose. A UN study of women in 64 countries reported that only 57% of women are able to make their own decisions over their sexual and reproductive health and rights. When women discern what to do when facing an unplanned pregnancy, a major factor in their decision-making is the support that they can expect in raising the child. Support from their sexual partner, support from family and friends, financial support, the cost of childcare, the policies at one's workplace, broader areas of structural support, etc. Women with unplanned pregnancies often feel that they are stuck, caught between non-negotiable moral obligations that compete. To use the language of ethicist Kate Jackson Mayer, many tragic dilemmas are the result of unjust social structures. The current abortion bans are deepening inequities already apparent in access to reproductive health services, especially for communities of color. In addition to the difficulty of that discernment when facing an unplanned pregnancy, reproductive loss is not uncommon in women's bodily experience. An estimated 23 million miscarriages occur each year. Stillbirth affects 1 in 175 pregnancies. Approximately 30% of pregnancies end in induced abortion. Nearly 1 in 4 women will have an abortion before the age of 45, including women who sit by us in church on Sunday. However, even among women, there is often a reluctance to discuss experiences of reproductive loss because of the nature of stigma and shame that women report. Silence in sacred spaces can lead to loneliness and confusion when Catholic women experiencing reproductive loss feel abandoned by their faith communities. Such experiences do not contribute to healing in body, mind, and soul after reproductive loss. Women's experiences of reproductive loss vary considerably, and yet the bodily nature of this loss presents very real challenges for a male-led hierarchical church, in the sense that pregnancy loss is experienced by the other. So men report on this experience not from their own personal awareness, but from their interpretation of or projection of women's narratives. If women's testimonies are undervalued and not considered authoritative, how then can leaders of the church teach honestly about something that they have not and cannot experience? The experiential gap creates epistemological hurdles for the church. Epistemological honesty humility, and listening are prerequisites for a Catholic approach to reproductive justice. So back to the seminary formation, given this epistemological hurdle, the curriculum of seminary formation can be said to be rooted in distrust of women's contributions to the life of the church. When it is rewritten, women should be at the table. Next, I'm going to briefly talk about gender scripts and how these prevent women's full participation in the church. So obviously, gender roles vary by culture and time, but too often gender roles perpetuate male power over women. Women in some rural communities shoulder an unequal burden of gathering water and wood for their families. The United Nations reports that collectively, women spend 40 billion hours a year collecting water. There are 5 million fewer girls than boys in primary school. Girls with higher levels of education are less likely to get married at an early age. Child marriage practices persist around the world. Globally, 12 million girls each year are married before the age of 18. Child marriage is not forbidden in the Code of Canon Law, which must be reformed in this matter. Women may hold up half the sky, but we don't even have half of the speaking parts in film. Fewer than a third of the speaking or named characters in film are female roles. In Catholic churches, women have fewer speaking parts as well. Women cannot preach the homily at Mass, for example. Christiane Murray, director of the Vatican Press Office, acknowledges that the goal of equality is still some way off for gender equality in the Catholic Church. The gender scripts in the Catholic Church tell the faithful how to act. They provide a roadmap for what is considered appropriate in the Christian moral life. Following John Paul II and Benedict XVI, Pope Francis asserted in Amoris Laetitia that biological sex and the sociocultural role of sex can be distinguished but not separated. Men should be masculine, women should be feminine. But what does this even mean in real life? In some places, Francis seems to approve of changing gender roles in family and society. He seems to acknowledge that gender roles can change over time and are culturally bound. He wrote, for example, "Nowadays, we acknowledge as legitimate and indeed desirable that women wish to study, work, develop their skills, and have personal goals." He goes on, "There can be a certain flexibility of roles and responsibility, depending on the concrete circumstances of each particular family." And further, and this is present on the slide there, this is a quote from Amoris Laetitia. "It is also true that masculinity and femininity are not rigid categories. It is possible, for example, that a husband's way of being masculine can be flexibly adapted to the wife's work schedule. Taking on domestic chores or some aspects of raising children does not make him any less masculine or imply failure, irresponsibility, or cause for shame." Francis goes on to say that it is important to reject rigid norms, including norms that would say that it is not really masculine to cultivate art or dance, or not very feminine to exercise leadership. That's 286 in Amoris Laetitia. In these places within Amoris Laetitia, Pope Francis seems to be stretching what we would consider to be traditional gender norms within magisterial teaching. And this is an important step forward. But in other places, gender roles are presented in stereotypical ways, and as if they are fixed and normative for all. For example, in Amoris Laetitia, men are said to offer protection and support in family life. This is how they live their masculinity. Fathers teach children to recognize the limits of life, teach them about hard work, and fathers have inherent authority, according to number 176. Francis repeats John Francis repeats John Paul II's claim that women have a feminine genius and that their specifically feminine abilities, motherhood in particular, also grant duties, because womanhood also entails a specific mission in this world. Francis says that mothers testify to the beauty of life, they prevent the spread of individualism, and they witness to tenderness. But why these gender-specific roles? Francis falls into patterns by which men are described on the basis of their strength, authority, and power, while women are described on the basis of their nurturing behavior, tenderness, and other directed love. Such gender scripts perpetuate gender-based inequalities in marriage and family today, even as the Pope claims to want to promote gender equality in society and in the family. For example, it is these scripts that lead to devastating statistics of domestic violence, as men assume divinely sanctioned power and authority over the women in their homes, and women can be expected to submit, obey, and even to sacrifice without counting the cost. Now, I want to say that's a problematic interpretation, but that's an interpretation that some have. These scripts can also be damaging for lesbian, gay, bisexual, non-binary, transgendered, intersex, and queer youth who are trying to make their way in the world today. We see high rates of depression, anxiety, and even suicide among LGBTQ youth today, youth who are seeking a place to be themselves, to be the people that God created them to be. Research shows us that gender scripts are variable, but we have not yet seen that research fully inform Catholic teachings. So I'm going to suggest a way forward. And I'm going to use the image of, or metaphor of, a doula. My claim is that the Holy Spirit is inviting feminist-minded believers in the Catholic Church to be spiritual doulas for the Church's upcoming transitions. A doula is someone who provides support and guidance to those who are going through major life transitions. Doulas are most commonly known for their work accompanying pregnant people through the late phases of gestation, childbirth, and postpartum recovery. But in fact, doulas work in other settings too, including accompaniment of women during miscarriage, induced abortion, and stillbirth, and even in hospice care, accompanying people through the process of diminishment and dying. Doulas have various roles depending on the situation. They can be educators, telling the person what to expect during the transition, teaching the person how to navigate difficulties during the transition. They can be cheerleaders, offering encouragement during times of pain, struggle, and fear. They can be witnesses, observing and documenting the sacred transition for loved ones. A doula communicates the message, you are not alone. You can do this. Even when it is hard, I will be here to support you. I'm told that in Argentina, one of the ways of translating doula is acompañante, or companion. This word, of course, is related to a word that Pope Francis has invoked repeatedly in his pontificate, accompaniment. Pope Francis uses this word as a reminder that Jesus issued a call to accompany others, to walk with others on the journey of life. So my action plan requires full inclusion of women and prioritizing structural change. Pope Francis has already admitted that we need a healthy dose of self-criticism. He says that in Amoris Laetitia 36. If the church is a sacrament in the world, the persistence of misogyny in the church's own structures is a scandal and undermines the church's witness to the gospel. As we work as doulas for the church in her transition to the full inclusion of women and just structures of ecclesial life, women should be at every table where decisions are made. Leaders of congregations of women religious should be esteemed consultants to Pope Francis as regularly as his top pool of advisors drawn from the College of Cardinals. I am advocating for incremental but substantive reforms. The synodal process that is currently underway is a positive development that enables greater opportunities for encounter. But even the synod process lacks equal representation of women in its final stages. By revising canon law, citing women theologians in ecclesial documents, revising and updating the program of priestly formation, and rejecting problematic gender norms, we can foster greater gender justice in ecclesial spaces. Let me end by sharing a local perspective. In the Diocese of San Diego, I was privileged to serve as a theologian for the Synod on the Family in 2017, and as a recorder for my parish listening session in preparation for our current Global Synod on Synodality, as well as on a team of scholars and ministers who worked together in a collaborative project called The Future of Faith at the University of San Diego. My experiences in our local synod have taught me the value of asking ordinary Catholics in the pews about how our current ecclesial structures foster their faith and also how they impose barriers to their full flourishing in the church. All diocesan reports are available on the diocesan website. Our Future of Faith team also organized listening sessions for women and for youth, and we offered our recommendations to Cardinal McElroy at the conclusion of the process. 3 of those recommendations are included on this slide. The creation of a women's speakers bureau for the diocese. Our idea here is that this would list Catholic women prominently on the diocesan website so that they could be identified as individuals willing to share their time and expertise with faith communities. We envisioned women with demonstrated expertise in pastoral care and counseling, spiritual direction, theology, Catholic education, family therapy, grief counselors, doulas and midwives, new mom support teams, and many others. A subset of women trained in homiletics would be listed as available to provide gospel reflections in Catholic liturgies at the invitation of the local pastor. Second, a women's advisory council for the diocese. This group of women would be appointed by the bishop and would meet with him quarterly to serve in an advisory capacity. The Women's Council would complement the existing Presbyteral Council, which is not open to women, and the existing Diocesan Pastoral Council, which is open to women. And third, a Synod on Women. A third proposal that emerged encouraged Cardinal McElroy to hold a diocesan Synod on Women with participants from all parishes. Having already implemented a successful Synod on the Family and Synod on Youth, our thinking was that we could build on the knowledge gained from the structures of those meetings, but focus the next synod on the needs, aspirations, and goals of Catholic women in San Diego. When women are restored to the ordained diaconate, we want to be ready. These recommendations have not been implemented, but some of these ideas have surfaced again in our diocesan dialogues about the ongoing synod on synodality. And I'm curious about whether all of you think that these would move us in a fruitful direction were they to be implemented. I conclude by saying, I am ready to serve as a doula for my local church as we work to fully include women and to prioritize structural change. My message, you are not alone. You can do this. Even when it is hard, I will be here to support you. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Wow. I love that image of a doula. That is new and very powerful, very powerful. So I am going to do a few things here so that people can unmute themselves. And if you want to ask a question, you can either unmute, or it'd be better if you just use that little reaction button and raise your hand. And let's see here. Okay, so now I've allowed you to unmute yourself. So we'll go ahead, and I would just ask that you keep your questions sort of short and to the point, or your comments, just so we can get as many people in to ask questions. So Barb, you're the first one up here. Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I just participated in the really good, it was an intergenerational 3-part series there about when the time of the pandemic, and it concluded on a Zoom format. But I was just wondering if you're willing to make that format sort of available and people could replicate it in their dioceses around the country, because it was a very enriching and positive experience that I had participating in that.
Thank you so much for saying that, Barb. I'm pleased to hear that it was enriching for you. Yes, so we actually are going to be having a team meeting with Jeffrey Burns, who is transitioning out of his role as the director of the CCTC on February 1st. And so I will bring that to the attention of the group, and we will find a place on the website where we can share that, and I can even make that available to Deb, the process that we used, if that's something that she would be interested in attaching to, like the notes of this presentation or on your own FutureChurch website. But that is certainly, that was part of our goal, that we would talk about this in such a way that it could be replicated in other places, because the feedback that we got in that moment, was still just a snapshot of what was happening in our local church in 2020 and 2021. And I'm sure that, were we even to gather the same group in the room today, people's impressions may be different again. So it's important to keep that moving forward.
Yeah, can you say just a little bit more? Because Barb seemed to know something that I'm missing some of the information. What was she talking about?
Absolutely. Yes. It's the Future of Faith program that we ran at the in coordination with the diocese and with the University of San Diego. And there were multiple events, both in person and on Zoom, as a part of the Future of Faith. So when I talked about doing the listening sessions with women and with youth, and then bringing people together, Sarah Hart, a musician, was a part of our very first one. And there were some really powerful experiences of women sharing their testimonies of their faith, in God, and of their experience of that faith, positively and negatively, within the local church. So I think that's what Barb was referring to. Oh,
we would love to share that. Okay, great. Laura Lee, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, it's Lorelai, but I guess it's kind of similar to Barb's. Like, is there a plan to implement this action plan, or like, can I knock on my archbishop's door and be like, "Hey, I'm the new doula for my archdiocese"? Like, are there 4 other people in the Denver area, and we want to get together and go? Like, how can we start to implement this? Is there a packet to download to email you? Like, what are the steps that you the practical steps that you are recommending?
Yeah. So I'll work on having a packet that would be downloadable for everyone who is interested. I do think that is something that's doable in terms of something that we could deliver, but it would still need to be something that happened, somewhat organically based on the needs of your local community. And in some cases, that might be strong collaboration with the bishop and strong collaboration with folks in the diocese. And in other places, that kind of collaboration may not be a possibility. So I'm very grateful for the leadership of Cardinal McElroy here. And he, was a wonderful conversation partner through that process, and was open to the recommendations, that were given to him. And yet, part of my frustration as a woman in the church is that even when something exciting like this happens, it's a recommendation to the local ordinary, right? There's still this, power structure that's set up that women have such great ideas, and yet it's in an advisory capacity only, at least in this context. And so I think that's why today I wanted to start with canon law and call for more substantive reforms, of the whole structure and system. And, obviously that's a big ask. And so working more concretely in the local community is something that for a lot of us, might be more doable. And it would start with, I would think, greater participation in the ongoing synod right now.
Great. And just to say that in the past, we have created a way of people learning about who else in your diocese or area might be interested in doing the same thing. So we could put together a kind of system where you could download this packet and also, say where you're from, and then we could, with the notion that you would be introduced to other people in your diocese. So we have done things like that before, and maybe that's something that we can think about in this as well. So, okay, Jane, you have a question.
Yeah, just a comment. I'm trained as an end-of-life doula. So when you mention doula, that's what comes to my mind. And what I'm thinking is, if the church isn't open to revitalization and reform and renewal, then it might be end-of-life doulas that we're looking at serving the church.
Well, I'm going to have to bring that to prayer. Thank you.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Jane. So Daryl, you have a question.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for that presentation. And it's just a quick question. So when I became Catholic, I was fortunate enough to become Catholic in a parish in Seattle where Archbishop Hunthausen had started a position of pastoral life director, where he could appoint women as basically the pastors of the church, even though priests came in to do the Eucharist. And I was just wondering, from what you know, is the pastoral life director an option for bishops to appoint women as the pastor while we wait for those who think in centuries to finally realize that women can be priests and bishops and cardinals and everything else?
Yes, that is still a role that many women do, play in the local church. So I believe that the title in the Diocese of San Diego is pastoral associate. And in the same way that you described, that is a leadership role in a parish community, or sometimes it's a pod of parishes. And that person has ministerial competence and also administrative competence. And so they are often in charge of some of the, hiring and contract procedures in the parish. They're also doing a lot of scheduling, or they're arranging for other folks within their ministerial team to be sure that all of the ministries are provided for. But often, that creates a sense of vibrancy within the parish, and it is a leadership role that lay people can have. Yeah.
Thank you, Daryl. Sharon, you have a question or comment.
Okay, I have a comment and a remark. I think I'm speaking with Americans. I am Canadian. Am I correct? Are you all Americans?
No, no, not all, but go ahead.
Okay, good. Because as a Canadian, I did not know this existed. So Emily, I want to say you just made my day that something like this exists. Okay, that I'm just blown away here. And so I'd like to get more involved. And my last statement is, you mentioned a cardinal is backing you up, and that blows me away, because there was a priest by the name of Roy, and I don't know how to say his last name, Bourge.
Bourgeois.
That's it.
Bourgeois.
He was excommunicated from the church because he spoke on behalf of women priests. So my question is this cardinal going to get excommunicated by the Pope?
Well, so Cardinal McElroy has not spoken in favor of women priests at this moment. And his support of our meetings was clear throughout. But I think that one of the things that he shared publicly, for example, in his writings in America Magazine during the time of the Amazonian meetings, he shared, his growing awareness of the geographical gaps, that people experienced in the Amazon, and the very long distances or long times between Eucharist. And so there is a sense in which these questions about justice and Eucharist and solidarity really are coming together, not only on the question of gender, but also issues of, geography and clericalism more broadly. So, I think that one of the things I'm appreciative of is that Cardinal McElroy is encouraging of conversations. And, this whole synod process is focused on authentic, honest dialogue, and we don't know where it's going to go. It looks open-ended. But I don't want to get him in trouble by saying that he said something that he hasn't, because, he has not explicitly come out in support for a change, but he's in the same way that Pope Francis is talking about dialogues of encounter and being open to wherever the synod process takes us. There's a kind of curiosity there and a willingness to live into the future that I think is different than some of the posture you see in, by other bishops.
Thank you very much.
And the other thing is, of course, we're in a different papacy than when Roy was excommunicated. So would that have happened now? That's a good question. But it's there. Certainly, Pope Francis has changed the very way we are with one another, with this notion of synodality and speaking with authenticity, and so I think we can take him up on it, and that's why we're having new conversations. So Elaine, you have a question. You have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
First of all, Emily, thank you for your reflections. I appreciate hearing your new research and what's happening.
Fitting Walsh's description, visiting various dumpsters.
Hold on just a second. We're getting other people who are, seems to be unmuted or muted. Go ahead.
I received my first theology degree in 1972, and it was just after Vatican II. And I have to say that as I listen to the conversation now, it's the same as it was in 1972. Okay. And I think that women need to become more angry. Anger in the terms of a power of love to make change, because we accept too much. We just say, they're going to say, okay, this is the law. Well, I'm sorry. That's not my relationship with God, and I'm not going to adhere to that. But we don't, because we're too socialized over the centuries to look to another. That's why I have trouble with women deacons, because women deacons are still under the authority of the male. I don't think we're going to have change in the church until we have equality of sexes. And that's hard to come by, because after 5 theology degrees, I simply say, you know what? This is the same conversation as in 1972. And I don't mean to discourage people, but that's what I hear.
I'm so glad you said that. It really resonates with some of the reading that I've been doing. I mentioned Rosemary Radford Ruther before, but, so many others who've been really writing on some of these issues for decades, for 40 years. Sexism and God Talk came out in 1983. So I appreciate you saying that, channeling that anger more productively could be part of the mission that we take up in this work, to see real change. But it's such a complex question, but I appreciate you raising it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Veronica, you have a question. You'll have to unmute. There you go.
Okay, so in the same time frame in 1972, I was pregnant with my third child, who would be under 3, and when he was born in March of 1973. So 3 children under 3 in March of 1973, just after Roe v. Wade came through. My husband had open heart surgery during my first pregnancy. So it was certainly time for us to think about planning our family beyond having more children. And it was very difficult for me to find natural family planning at that time. So the church is proposing that that kind of approach. And I was not able to find help right away to learn how to really practice modern natural family planning. My doula turned out to be a priest, a local Capuchin priest at a local college. And he brought together other people who were also looking in that direction, but looking for modern scientific information about how to understand the female body and use that to plan your family with your partner, making decisions together on what your family size would be and when. So for me, that process involved starting a local organization for natural family planning, making my home a call-in center for people looking for natural family planning, expanding it to a regional consortium of hospital and diocesan-based, and a couple league was out at that time. All of those trying to bring all of those people together to share our knowledge and our information and where we could go for the future. I would say that was a turning point for me, learning that the power, I call it the power of my yes. That I could make a decision about, with full information of how my body worked and the practice of natural family planning, I had the power of my yes, which I think that most people today haven't had that opportunity. That I would like to see us as women work for good scientific ways to manage our fertility, and to do that in conjunction with our male partners in the sexual relationship is really ground zero for being able to partner together as men and women making decisions together at that very family life level that we all grow up in one way or another. So that would be my hope for the future here when we look at the reproductive issues that we are dealing with as women.
Sorry.
I can put my hand down now.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much for sharing about your leadership in that space. And I'll just say briefly, I've published on natural family planning and feminist responses to sort of broader ways of managing fertility. And one of the really exciting aspects of natural family planning for a lot of Catholic women is that it is empowering. And there are a lot of women who really report positive benefits. One of the downsides, significantly, is that it requires participation from one spouse, and in a context of unequal power relations, which, frankly, our theology of marriage often, does not account for the realities of that gender injustice within marriage. That can really put women's lives at risk if they don't have the cooperation of their spouse. And it's very complicated. So I'll just, say part of what I think a synodal approach can mean is that people with those different experiences, whether NFP is powering or disempowering, should be able to come together and just have honest conversations in parish settings, instead of some feeling shamed by even, their initial negative reactions to some of those things. I appreciate the way that you brought up that learning more and spending more time on that issue helped you to feel, alive, and helped you to be able to contribute more within your own space. So thanks for sharing that.
Great. Margie, you have a question. Let's see, you're going to have to unmute, Margie.
Yes,
Yeah.
sorry. It's not so much a question, but a comment. It just does my heart so much good. I recall when Rosemary Radford Ruther was disinvited from the University of San Diego. And so now to have Emily on board there in theology gives me hope, because I was one of those women back in 72, 50 years ago saying, when is this going to happen? And I still say that. I would also, it gave me hope to be part of that 3-part series that the university offered. And it would be wonderful if that could be replicated across the country. And it was Jeff and Rosemary, and Emily and others did such a good job. I believe it could be replicated in other dioceses, maybe with or without even the support of the bishop. It was lay-led. And it was certainly Bishop McElroy at the time, he was a bishop, gave his blessing to it. But we are so fortunate here to have Cardinal McElroy, who I believe would ordain women today if he could, and has said that. But he can't under current canon law. But if we don't raise our voices across this country, 72 will soon be, in 2052, we're going to be, the same women are going to be saying the same things we're saying today. So do not remain silent. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you for that affirmation, Margie.
Hey, women too.
That's right.
Amen. Thank you. Oh, Al, you have a question. So you'll have to unmute, Al. Can you unmute? Oh, there he goes. All right. So Al, I'm not hearing you. Okay, we'll come back to you and see if you can come in later. Russell, you have a question. Russell Jenkins, you'll have to unmute.
Is that it?
Yeah, there you are. Yeah, you're here.
One observation, one question. The observation is that power never gives up power without someone taking it from them. So I thoroughly encourage Ms. Reimer-Barry to, you're absolutely right. Unless you guys start making a lot of noise and making some people uncomfortable, things probably won't change. They never have. So I encourage you to do that. My observation is I was flabbergasted to see your slide on gender roles. I have 3 sons, and I live in the mid-Atlantic, so maybe it's just where I live, but I would say that today's 30-somethings, even 40-somethings, 20-somethings, do not adhere by any kind of strict gender roles anymore. And the couple I know share all the duties and responsibilities in child rearing. And I didn't change. I'm 67. I didn't change too many diapers, but my sons have changed a boatload. So can you comment on that, please?
Yes. So thank you for bringing that up. So what I was trying to do in that section is to raise up those aspects of Amoris Laetitia. So that's from 2016. It's not that old, not 10 years old. So aspects of Amoris Laetitia where the Pope is describing normative gender roles. And when I'm teaching that document to 18 and 19-year-olds at the University of San Diego, a lot of them respond in just the way that you did in describing your own son's sort of lived experience of the fluidity of gender. And that tends to be something that we talk about a lot in the classroom as they're, reacting to what they read, or at least some parts of what they read in that document. And part of what concerns me in terms of moving forward in the church is that, like, our theology of ministry remains rooted in this sex inequality that does describe, men as having particular kinds of leadership and authority that are then not opened to women. And they tend to describe this in terms of a natural hierarchy created by God, whether it's the natural law framework or revelation framework or tradition framework. The argument of the exclusion of women from, leadership within the church does still fall along that gender line, and it doesn't reflect what a lot of people today experience, including a lot of young people, which is a more fluid approach to gender itself. So I think you've really named the exact issue that we could continue to talk about in the church. How, what does gender mean? What's appropriate in terms of what it means to be masculine or feminine? What does it look like to share leadership within the church, to be co-responsible members of the church together?
Great. It is 8:00, so I'm going to take one more question, and then we're going to have to, call an end to it. So Aaron, you're up next.
Hey, Emily.
Hi, Aaron.
My question would be, so often all of us hear the Vatican often saying things like, oh, there go the Americans again. And I guess my question would be, in so many countries that are predominantly Catholic around the world, women's roles are 0 to nothing. And they often don't even speak up in those countries because it's so male dominated. How do we as church foster a conversation in those countries that can lead to a bigger conversation within the church, so that, the hierarchy is not always just saying, oh, that's the Americans or that's the Europeans, but that it's the whole church speaking up, that we are demanding that women have greater roles?
It's such a great question, Aaron, and I appreciate you raising it. One of the things that I found in my research is that the conversation shifts when women are in a space that they consider to be safe to speak about their experiences. And a lot of times that means women speaking with other women, or women speaking with a female researcher. So there's a study in the Philippines, for example, about the different stories women tell about violence within their relationships when they're in a group only of women and a group that includes men. And the kind of self-censoring that happens when women are telling their stories is something that, I think about a lot in terms of, on the one hand, a synodal process should mean that we all come together to share our stories. We all come together to encounter each other and to share honestly. But the realities of power dynamics are such that all of us probably scope the room first, figure out what's appropriate to say, censor ourselves in these spaces. And the reality is that church is not always the safe place for people to talk about what's really going on in their lives.
For sure.
It should be, but it isn't always. And so I think that the more we can create safe spaces for people to tell that reality, the more, the better we would be. But we also need to just be sensitive about those power dynamics and how they do shape the conversations.
Great. Thank you, Aaron, for that question. And thank you, Emily, for a wonderful presentation. You truly are a doula. I mean, your sensibilities, the way you are able to hold what we have to say with such respect and tenderness, and to offer your own thoughts. It's just been wonderful. So thank you so much. And thank you, everyone who has joined us tonight. I would like to end with the prayer, and then we'll open up the mics and everyone can chatter away and say goodbye. So at the end of this sacred time together, let us pray. O living God, We give thanks for your holy people and for the church. We ask that you grace every member so they may be freed to serve you in truth and grace. We remember and give thanks for all those women who have faced the unknown in faith and met fear with courage. We give thanks for all people of faith who have dared to step forward and lead, for all those who have challenged the stereotypes of society and risked standing alone. Holy One, continue to grace all the women and men who have struggled to reform our history, who have sought in their time to minister to the needs of those who are hurt, disadvantaged, and alienated in our land and in our church. We give thanks for those whose faces and names are unknown, yet whose work helps to fulfill your vision of shalom on earth. Amen.